This video discusses the types of LCAs and the ISO standards that define them. I'm Lise Laurin with EarthShift Global. So why should we follow the ISO standards for LCA? In my experience, the biggest reason to follow the standards is to minimize risk. When you publish your impact results or make a claim that your product is better than your competition or what has gone before, the result's going to be scrutinized by your competitors and likely by your customers. If it's not robust, they may take it to a regulator like the U.S. Federal Trade Commission or the European Union, who both have rules preventing unsubstantiated environmental claims. In the U.S., they may even press a suit against your company. The standards also ensure that your study has a high credibility. A critically reviewed life cycle assessment study, and when I say to the ISO standards, I mean ISO 14040 and 044, is going to have more stringent requirements than even a study in a peer-reviewed journal. Lastly, following these standards makes sure you don't have surprises in your supply chain. If you do only a carbon footprint, for example, you might find out later that your product has a high ecotoxicity burden upstream, and that might cause concern in the marketplace. In addition to the ISO standards, LCA has credibility from work done by the UNEP Lifecycle Initiative, the European Platform on Lifecycle Assessment, and the American Center for Lifecycle Assessment. All of those organizations rely on ISO 14040 and 14044 for their work. So let's talk about the types of LCA. Typically, the first level of LCA you want to do is a screening level. In the screening level, we take whatever data we have and build our model so we can get an early idea of where we are with respect to our goal. We'll often refine the data as needed and run scenarios. Screening studies may be for a single product or for a comparison. Screening studies are great to understand where the highest impacts are in your product life cycle. We call those hotspots. Once you know where the hotspots are, you can see where you can make change. It may not always be within your factory. Material selection, energy consumption, and product longevity are all under the manufacturer's control. Screening studies can also provide insights for obvious changes and will identify where better data are needed. You can do comparisons with other systems for internal discussion. What you don't want to do with your screening level study is to publish the results. Whether you want to make a claim, do a footprint, create an EPD, you need to add rigor to your study before you move forward. It's also important to remember that to call a study LCA, life cycle assessment, it must be more than a footprint. Footprints are covered in other ISO standards, but the LCA requires that you have a comprehensive set of indicators. The next level of study that you're going to do is what's often called a full LCA. In a full LCA, the data from the screening study are made more robust. Assumptions can be validated and documented, or you can test them to determine their impact on the results, whether or not they're going to affect the results. Whether for a single product or for a comparison, a lengthy report is required. We're going to talk about the reporting requirements in a minute. In addition, a review of the full LCA is external. Full LCAs are resource intensive. They require a lot of data gathering, which is typically done by people within the enterprise, and they can be expensive because there's a lot of work that has to be done by the practitioner, and if that's external, it's going to be expensive. If you can achieve your goals with a screening level study, we'll stick with it. You don't need to go any further. The major sections of a full LCA report include the general aspects, the goal of the study, the scope of the study, the life cycle inventory analysis, impact assessment, interpretation, and critical review. We'll go through each of these pretty quickly. So the general aspects include who did the study, who paid for it, when it was completed, and some wording so people know it was done to the standards. The goal section includes why you are doing the study, what questions you are trying to answer, and who is your audience. You also need to disclose whether or not the study is a comparative assertion. The scope section includes information about the function of the product or products under study, the unit that the study will revolve around, and system boundaries and cutoff criteria. Keep going. Inventory analysis includes not only how and where your data comes from, but also a complete description of how you modeled it, including all of the inputs and outputs, along with their quantities and secondary data used. The quality of the data must also be documented. The impact assessment method must be documented or referenced along with all of the results. Depending on the type of assessment done, more documentation may be required. The interpretation section considers the limitations of the study, the insights gathered, conclusions, and recommendations for moving forward. Your critical review is considered part of the study. In addition to the names of the reviewers, you're going to include their comments and your responses. There are additional requirements for comparative assertion, including the requirement for a critical review, panel critical review. So when is a study considered comparative? It's whenever a stakeholder other than the commissioners who paid for the study, might negatively be affected by the results. The reason for this is you don't want people just publishing LCAs that might negatively affect their competitors or someone else without any rigor behind them. So if you are going to share your results, you need to have a review. So what kind of review do you need? With a single product study, if you're only studying one product or a product line, a review is recommended. You don't have to have the review, but it's strongly recommended. If you do have the reviewer may be internal or external, but may not have been involved in this study. Only one reviewer is needed if you're preparing a study for an EPD or PEF. That you do have to have that one reviewer, and that reviewer needs to be external to the organization. If you're working on an EPD or a PEF, the program operator may select the reviewer for you. If your study falls into the comparative category, you need a panel of at least 3 people. At least one of them, typically the chair, must be an LCA expert. And it's really beneficial if the other reviewers are expert in the field of study so they can vet your data and add credibility to the study. I hope you've learned something from this video. There are some other topics that might be of interest in footprinting. There are also other ways to categorize LCA, including attributional versus consequential, that you might want to look into, as well as anticipatory prospective or ex ante studies that project what might be in the future. They're often used for new technology. So thank you for your attention. If you have questions, please reach out to me via the email on the screen.